Thanks for joining us. And today we're going to talk about the science of Kriya Yoga. So there are a number of spiritual teachers, of Kriya Yoga teachers, and others who are interested in a spiritual science of Kriya Yoga. And in particular, what I'm talking about with this is that the Kriya Yoga is based on principles and best practices. Basically, Kriya Yoga is a very effective means for getting internal, which is called pratyahara in yoga, and getting into deeper meditative states. It does this through a process of intentional breathing, which are the Kriya Yoga practices. For example, Kriya Pranayama is a form of intentional breathing that leaves one into a low idle state. And in Kriya Yoga, we know that it works because it works on certain principles. One of the main principles about Kriya Yoga and the way that it works is that it helps to activate the body's parasympathetic nervous system. So within the body's central nervous system, there is both the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic. So the sympathetic nervous system could be considered as the gas pedal in the nervous system, and the parasympathetic to be considered as the brake of the nervous system. So anytime we want to slow down to get into a rest and digest situation, we would engage the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, Kriya Yoga is ingenious because it works directly on the parasympathetic nervous system. As I said, Kriya Pranayama is a form of intentional breathing that actually activates a section of nerves, of parasympathetic nerves, that runs along the anterior part of the spine, the front part of the spine, called the dorsal vagal complex. And when you stimulate the dorsal vagal complex with a technique like Kriya Pranayama or heart rate variability resonance breathing, what happens is that it sends a signal to the medulla oblongata, which is in the brain stem, which controls the autonomic functions of heartbeat and actually slows your heartbeat down. So in Kriya Yoga, when you're doing this slow intentional breathing that is affecting the medulla oblongata to slow down the heart rate, you are getting into a low idle state. You're starting to get into something called pratyahara in yoga, internalization. And it's a direct result of this type of breathing. And so we know that Kriya Yoga, as a form of intentional breathing, can be effective as a means of bringing us into something called heart rate variability, which is another term for respiratory sinus arrhythmia. So basically, when you breathe in, your heart rate goes up slightly, and when you breathe out, your heart rate goes down slightly. And so there's this seesaw situation happening with your heart rate, which is directly influenced by your breath. And when you do an intentional form of breathing like Kriya Pranayama or heart rate variability resonance breathing, where you slow down your breath and you get it below a certain threshold, which we know is 7 breaths per minute, you get into heart rate variability and you start to get into a low idle state, is that your breath slows down and your heart rate slows down and you get this sense withdrawal going internal. So we know that by looking at Kriya Yoga objectively, we understand the effect on the body through the body's central nervous system and getting internalized. So this is really an application of scientific principles to Kriya Yoga. And Kriya Yoga in its most efficient form finds a critical path to meditation. And a critical path is something that's used in project management, saying what is the absolute most efficient way to get to the desired result. And in project management, it's really about optimizing resources, time, and quality, and seeing what dynamics you can play with to get the optimum result. Now, similarly in Kriya Yoga, we want to get the optimum result. And the first immediate goal in Kriya Yoga is to get into pratyahara, into internalization. So there are some Kriya Yoga schools that have learned Kriya Yoga through different lineages and have come up with versions of Kriya Yoga that have been modified from the original form that Lahiri Baba, who's the originator of Kriya Yoga, gave to his students. And so many of these later practices in certain Kriya Yoga schools have stripped out elements of the original Kriya. And as a result, their form of Kriya Yoga is not as effective as the original taught by Lahiri Baba. And what happens then is that their ability to follow a critical path to get into internalization is compromised. But one could be spending a long time in doing the Kriya Yoga techniques to be able to feel the onset of the internalization of pratyahara. Now, the original Kriya, as taught by Lahiri Baba, which is also taught in the Panchanan Bhattacharya lineage, which is a lineage I'm part of and which I teach, This allows one to get into an internalized state in pratyahara in 5 minutes or less. And Lahiri Baba gave this original statement, which he said that 12 Kriya equals pratyahara. Basically, 12 repetitions of Kriya Pranayam brings on the internalization, pratyahara, or the freeze response. So the freeze response is a modern term for pratyahara, where it's basically the galvanic skin response. You start to feel sensations in your body that show you that you're starting to move into an internalized state. So your hands may be hot and heavy, you may feel a pulsation in your lower lip, you may feel tingling throughout the body or tingling up and down the spine. Any kind of tingling sensation as your awareness starts to go inwards is the freeze response, the galvanic skin response, which is pratyahara. And so we know that the original Kriya, as taught by Lahiri Baba, which we teach in the Panchanan Bhattacharya lineage, allows you to get at least the beginning stages of this pratyahara, of this freeze response, in 5 minutes or less. That is really the target that Lahiri Baba has set for us. And it's a way that you can do a quality check on your particular type of Kriya, right? Whatever lineage that you have learned from, are you starting to get the signs of the freeze response of pratyahara in 12 Kriyas? And if you're not, you know that either you're not doing the Kriya Yoga practice correctly, or that something has been tinkered in the particular Kriya technique that you are using, and so that it's not as effective as the original. So this, keystone quality check of getting the onset, at least, of pratyahara within 12 Kriya is a really good target to keep in mind when you're doing your practice. Now, the principles of getting into pratyahara really come from the first Kriya, what we call the first chapter in the Panchanan Bhattacharya lineage, this Kriya Pranayam. And as well, one starts to engage in something called kumbhaka, which is breath retention. Breath retention has an impact on the body's central nervous system of shifting you into the tranquil breath, or at least pushing you in that direction. The tranquil breath has been called breathlessness, or the breathless state. And really what it is not so much that you stop breathing, because you still continue to breathe, but in the tranquil breath, the amplitude of your breath starts to shallow out, and then basically the breath disappears from your awareness. You're still breathing, but it is so faint that you're basically not aware that you're breathing at all. And what happens from that when you get into the tranquil breath is that the body starts to disappear from your awareness entirely. And you move into an internalized state that we call dharana in yoga, which is meditation on an internalized void. So the body is gone and you start to go inside. And so either you can stabilize that state and be very calm and internalized and concentrated, or you can shift into deeper aspects of meditation, what we call dhyan, where things start to happen. You may feel an expansion, you may see lights, you may move into other, metaphysical dimensions, if you will, have these inner perceptions of things that occur. Your Ishtadevata, which is one's concept of the divine, may appear in your meditation and draw you in, and you may become absorbed in that. All of these kind of things happen when you start to transition from pratyahara, from internalization, through the tranquil breath into dharana, into this internalized concentration. So we know there's a very consistent process that happens in meditation, which was expounded by the sage Patanjali in his Yoga Sutras, where once you engage in pranayam, which is some kind of intentional breathing or life force control, that it results in pratyahara, internalization, which then shifts you towards dharana, this internalized concentration. And so we know this is a consistent trajectory in people who meditate, and certainly in other traditions that have mapped out these different states and stages of meditation. We know that there's a consistent trajectory in terms of going into deeper and deeper meditative states. So my particular interest in Kriya Yoga really has to do with the science of Kriya Yoga, for discovering principles and best practices that allow one to most expeditiously get into deep meditation. Because I have studied other forms of Kriya Yoga prior to the Panchanan Bhattacharya lineage, and I found myself spending a lot of time in wasted effort floating around with some dubious practices that were taught to me and not getting the results in meditation that I wanted. Now I realize that there are principles and best practices to get into the deepest meditation state. And we know that Lahiri Baba created Kriya Yoga for householders who have limited time, people who have worldly lives and are very busy. They may have children, they probably have careers, whatever they're doing. They have limited time to practice Kriya Yoga, and they need something that's very effective that allows them to get into a deep internalized state and to have a spiritual experience very quickly. And the original Kriya does that. And the thing about Kriya Yoga is that you don't need to believe in anything in particular. You don't need to be part of any particular religion. And certainly Lahiri Baba's students were from many wide-ranging religions. They were not all Hindus. And so the Kriya Yoga allowed them to have this inner experience and to have a connection, meaning that they could have that natural personal connection with their concept of the divine. And then they were not encumbered by the cultural baggage of another spiritual path, of another religion. And really that's what Kriya Yoga is about. It's really about finding the truth within, discovering your true nature. It is really being able to perceive that through your own experience without the cultural baggage from other traditions. And the way to do that is to understand the principles and to have best practices that support your spiritual development. So if you have any questions about this video, feel free to send me an email at info@modernkriya.com. Also check our website at modernkriya.com and our YouTube channel. So thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time.